Hi there. Welcome to a second episode of our podcast, Pulling Weeds. I'm your host, Michael, also known as Ozark Nation on Instagram. Our other host, Jeffrey, also known as Quality Over Quantity
Are
over
we
here on
doing
Instagram.
coast or are we doing co-host?
Jeffrey, how you doing today?
I'm doing well. I'm doing
We're
well.
both
It's
hosts. I don't know.
coasting, co-hosting.
I'm a co-host.
All
Yeah.
right. Well, it's good to be with you. I wish we had more time to talk these days, but life is busy for all of us, and we're all just trying to make it. So this is a great opportunity to convene and discuss the world and agriculture and things that mean something to us in life. So looking forward to hearing what you're getting into and paying attention to these days.
We've been just staying really busy with the yard and getting the farm slash garden installed. We got our greenhouse up and got all the weed mats down. Had some killer stumps to pull out, but yeah. So now we've got me and the boy filled up 20 flats of soil yesterday, and um, I also finally bought our first lawnmower that we've owned since 2011. So went out and mowed for a while yesterday and kicked in some allergies, so I didn't get the seeds that planted that I wanted to get done today. But live another day, get it done tomorrow. Is
It
what it
happens.
is.
Spring's always an adjustment period, getting back into
Yeah,
the all the pollens
yeah,
and whatnot.
yeah. The oaks have been going crazy here, and as soon as they wrap up, the pines are just going to start going hard, and then all the palm trees will start going after that. So it doesn't really stop here.
Yeah,
But
the palm trees are
brings a
going
lot of
off for us for
butterflies and cool
sure.
things like that.
Yeah, I haven't seen any
Heck
butterflies
yeah.
yet. I'm jealous.
Yeah, I haven't seen the ones that I got to watch out for. The big yellow swallowtail should show up soon. Then I'll have to start spraying so they don't eat all my lemon and lime trees. Otherwise, they just butcher them.
Gotcha.
They have those. They lay those caterpillars. I think I posted them last year on Instagram, but I'll pull them up again. But they look like bird poop, like big old pieces of bird poop, and they're real gross looking.
Hmm.
But they just completely defoliate a small lemon or lime tree, which mine are small.
Do you think they're more
So
effective on a smaller tree
we
because the
try and
leaves
pick
aren't
most.
as like thick and leathery?
They eat fast, bro. Caterpillars, especially down here, it's so warm. Like the cycle of everything is really fast, and the swallowtails are laying eggs for quite a while. It seems like there's at least two solid laying cycles for them, but on a really large scale tree, it's really not an issue because they'll just kind of like clean out the innards and stuff like that, and then by the time they're done, they metamorphose into a butterfly and they're gone. But on a small one, they just butcher it. So we relocate them for the most part. We take them to the Japanese honeysuckle and stuff like that. They'll lay uh, eggs, caterpillars on those too. So it's a natural food source for them as well.
Gotcha.
So I'm
Yeah, I
not
really
too
haven't had a
worried
lot of
about the
butterflies in the
swallowtails.
garden, unfortunately. Just like dragonflies and praying mantises and decent amount of bees. I'd like to see more bees for sure,
Gotcha.
but I am surrounded by a neighborhood of glyphosate users, so it's challenging to
Yeah,
you know let them know there's a safe haven here.
for sure. Especially for the bees that we really want to protect and stuff. The honeybees aren't really what's endangered. It's the carpenter bees and the bumblebees. We call them rumble bumbles, but they live underground and don't really come out until it starts to warm up. So that's where they really get affected too, is people tilling early and just tearing up some of the brush line and stuff. It's you can't plant much before the soil's 50 degrees, so there's no reason to go in there and start tearing it up too much unless you really have to. And the bumblebees down here go crazy, and they're fun because you can pet them and stuff. They don't sting you. And then the honeybees are finally coming out. But I was going to say, we got really excited the other night. We had the lights on outside, and a big lunar moth came up to the window 2 nights in a row, actually. So it was pretty cool because we haven't seen a lunar moth for like 4 years here.
Wow, very cool. Yeah, birds have been
Yeah,
chirping
I love
majorly in my yard for
their
sure. Birds are
cycle.
nonstop. But
That's awesome. They wake you up.
they do, yeah. They're going off the other day at like 3:30 in the morning, which is a little bit annoying, but it's they're
Yeah.
part of the party too, so they got their ticket. They're allowed to come in and play.
Yeah. We have at least like 4 or 5 pairs of cardinals that just chirp super early too. And then there's like one blue jay family that stays. And then today I woke up with the little bit of a headache from the sinuses and got to hear the owl going off at 3:30 in the morning. So that's kind of fun. He talks a lot.
Owls are certainly cool.
Yeah, there's a couple of pairs. There's a couple of pairs of owls that live around us, and they usually go off around like 3 or 4 in the afternoon as well. And they start talking to each other. So it's pretty cool. There's a bunch of owls on the island and bats.
Nice. Makes me wish I lived in a more rural climate for sure. I feel like it's on the agenda, but I like where I live for now.
Yeah, we're not
It's
real
dealable.
rural here. I mean, I mean, you're able to have a garden and stuff. That's pretty nice.
A garden and
Some
affordable
people
living in
would
the Bay
probably
Area,
argue.
those rarely go hand in hand.
Indeed.
Um, so yeah, what else you been getting into?
That's about it. I mean, that's been eating up about a lot of my time is all that and school and the kids with their math, working on getting some pups. We're pretty excited about that. Kids haven't had a puppy yet, so this will be their first puppy. So we're getting some Alapaha blue blood bulldogs. Gonna get a pair. They're pretty stoked. I'm stoked.
Yeah,
Jennifer's
puppies are
stoked.
great.
So yeah, need them, man. Haven't had a dog since same time had a lawnmower. Lost a lot of things in 2011.
Let's see, getting over a little bit of an injury. Got a knee issue going on that's been slowing down my progress. So I've been working on some like physical therapy stretching that a friend of mine taught me. And it seems like it's getting better, but in all my years of
Is it getting
athleticism,
better?
it is. But in all my years of athleticism, I never had a knee injury, so it's a little bit scary because my current career makes me move about probably 6, 7,000 pounds of dairy around in a 4-day period of time. So it's challenging physically, and as we get older it creates more challenges. So yeah, just working through that. Seems to be getting
Yeah.
better. Other than that, had a really cool powwow with the owners of my company this past weekend, which I was really excited about. I don't get to see them very often, so got to ask a lot of questions about the nature of the dairy industry with which we work in. And also, one of the owners is doing a talk with Will Harris, a famous regenerative farmer who just came out with a book that's getting a lot of notoriety. And it's always really interesting. I took a class with the folks that did Kiss the Ground and learned a little bit. I mean, I'd say a good amount about certain aspects of regenerative farming from their perspective, but I always find it's more interesting to hear it from people that are actually doing the farming, especially at scale, because I think that's the whole question in that industry. Can we
Yeah.
actually provide enough food? I think that's been the question in organic food for a long time, and now with regenerative, I think it's even more of a question. And obviously, there's huge think tanks out there that are
And how?
doing research and saying that it's not possible. And then you have the other side of it speaking about bees, where it's like, well, if there's no bees and we don't create ecosystems for things like butterflies and birds and waterways for waterfowls to come to, then do we really have an ecosystem with which we can continue to create the different species of food and animals that have provided for us for centuries? And I think it's Vandana Shiva did the documentary film talking about all the species of vegetables that have gone extinct and animals. And this is something that I really am passionate about when and promoted my work in regenerative farming so far, is learning about it and educating people. So I'm really excited I hope we can get a video of the talk that they're doing together at this conference. Because Will Harris, I'm fairly familiar with him. I know he's in Georgia and he's near you, and he's pretty much the guy who brought grass-fed beef to the attention of Whole Foods. He no longer apparently works with Whole Foods. He's created enough of a system, a localized system for himself that he's able to avoid working with Whole Foods, which is not the case for a lot of companies. A lot of health food companies, 50% or more of their business comes through Whole Foods, and it's a reality for them to stay in business. So he's been able to be successful that way. But I'm really interested. He's the first regenerative farmer that I know of that's gotten on Joe Rogan, for example, and he went on twice in the last year. And one of the statistics that we talked about this past weekend that I found really funny and interesting is that we touched on glyphosates a little bit last week, and when you talk about and I'm not going to say there's any judgment about people's dietary choices, but when you talk about like the Impossible meat, right, and those burgers and whatnot that's out there, that's I've seen recently being sold in Burger King, um, they have a lot of glyphosate residue in these substances, and it's big in anything with soy. It's one of the reasons I don't do soy milk anymore. But uh, for Will Harris brought this point up, and he said for every pound of Impossible meat, the carbon positive aspect of it, you would need a pound of my grass-fed beef to offset that and make it carbon neutral, right? So that statistic alone, I think, is like just fascinating, and I love that somebody's out there on a forum like Joe Rogan's talking about it and getting people to think about it, because I, having owned an ice cream shop, one of the reasons I was okay with walking away from it was I thought the cows were the problem. And now I'm realizing that they're anything but. It's about how you take care of the cow and how you take care of the animal. And planned holistic management is so critical this way.
Right. It's really interesting that he's down here in the quote unquote dirty South, where it's warm, the temperatures are up, and carbon sequestration cycle is really fast. So it's neat to see farmers that are really doing this regenerative farming without inputs like compost. Like if I was to bring in a compost constantly, it's the carbon cycle here is so fast. I would be bringing in compost so fast I couldn't even afford it, And that's the thing is you talk to a lot of these large scale farmers that might have started at a craft level and they slowly scale up. Is at some point the compost and adding compost and things like that, it gets to not be very feasible anymore. It's just the overhead and the logistics of everything is just outrageous. Whereas, so you see folks like this guy down here, he's in Georgia, you said?
He's in Georgia, yes.
The key to what he's doing is holistic grazing with cattle. Like you said, cows are actually part of fixing it because they're constantly adding. They're eating the grass, they're adding the manure. They're adding to the carbon cycle naturally in that own way. And if you graze them properly, you just move them. It's pretty easy peasy. And there's actually a lot of pretty cool people down here in the South doing stuff like that. We get all of our meat from a grass-fed beef guy. He does beef and pigs. And then there's a few other people that I do follow on Instagram that are down here and do pretty large scale holistic grazing with cows, and some of them have sheep and pigs as well. And it's really cool. And the animal husbandry is the cornerstone of regenerative farming. Even when it comes to like KNF and stuff, is you really fall short of the whole program if you're not doing the IMO to the point of incorporating the feces and manure and doing all that part. It's just learning part and then just stopping.
Yeah, think of all the russet mites we could have avoided if that lesson was taught more commonly about 5 years ago in cannabis. Oh, geez. Yeah, no, it's real fascinating. One of the things that I really enjoyed talking about with them this weekend was the fact that so many of these guys that are pillars of the regenerative movement nowadays are former glyphosate users, and so many of them in like the 80s, 90s, and even early 2000s, because of the influence from big ag and, the Monsantos and Cargills of the world who were creating these pesticides, they it was thought of back then as okay to use them. Nobody knew that these things were potentially causing cancer or anything of that nature. So, at one point I was talking to the owner, and he was like, "Yeah, I had our son, who I work with, out spraying the fence lines with glyphosates when he was like 6 or 8 years old, not knowing any better, right? Not intentionally doing it, and not knowing, just literally not knowing that this was a problem." And he was, the same thing can be said about Will Harris. The same thing I know personally can be said about Gabe Brown, who's kind of the poster child of the Kiss the Ground sequel, Common Grounds, it seems like, which I haven't watched yet. But it was so common then and sold as like, hey, this is a solution. It's not bad. Don't worry about it. And now, 30 years later, 25 years later, we realize that wasn't true. But and it's no judgment. I think it just really shows that people make mistakes, right? And whether it's like Tucker Carlson working for Fox and what he's doing nowadays as far as an independent journalist, or I know we talked about Chris Cuomo coming on the Patrick Bet-David Valuetainment podcast, or when you talk about these farmers, it's all kind of the same in that like everybody deserves a chance to repent in any field, and like even within my own body, like I drank a ton of Mountain Dew in high school in my early 20s, and I would never put that shit in my body again.
Code Red,
Right?
baby.
Yeah, totally. But I did, and that's the reality of it. And now I have to like treat my body a certain way and work around some of the problems that I created from doing that. And it's the same thing when you look at agriculture or politics or big pharma and its influence in the food industry. And I think that's like an area where you and I really agree and have some common insight in terms of the way we look at it.
Yeah, and I mean, whether we think they paid the price or not, I mean, the bottom line is a lot of these people do pay a pretty hefty price already, whether we know it or not. I mean, these guys that are becoming regenerative farmers that come from traditional farming, they probably watched a lot of their relatives get sick. A lot of these guys were doing crazy things. I mean, I've had my arm up to my elbow mixing a tank of glyphosate as a young kid. We
Wow.
just did shit that we didn't know. Um,
Wow.
so I mean, you see these people are getting kids sick, and they're watching their people die. We've done stories on it with the glyphosate stuff. There's the guy that sued Monsanto, and shortly after Monsanto got bought out.
Yeah, exactly.
But
Within like
yeah,
six
so I
months
mean,
or a
these guys
year
are
of
paying
COVID
the
hitting.
price, whether we know it or not.
Yeah, I
These
mean,
farmers are paying the price, watching their loved ones get sick, and they might have their own issues that they're dealing with from it, and there's obviously changing things. A lot of these guys are doing pretty good practices, you know. And if people want to talk about if they're not doing good enough or not, well, I mean, we can look at what those people are doing too.
well, that's like one of the things that I found so interesting talking to Blake Saturday night was like he told me that one of the there's like in regenerative farming when they teach it in a class setting, there's like 6 pillars of regenerative farming, and I'm not going to go through all of them, but like one of them's like not tilling the ground, right, and keeping the ground covered. And then another one that was like difficult for me to understand, but I kind of did because of my experience in agriculture and mainly in cannabis, was context, right? And so he said that it took him years to understand context, right? And so one of the questions that I've like really wanted to ask him for a while, but I didn't want to offend him, or I just wanted like the right moment to ask him, was in terms of the context with our dairy farm. We're very blessed in that it's in a coastal climate in Northern California on the coast that is predominantly mild, between like 55 and 70 degrees. And so our animals get access to green grass
Yeah.
pretty much year round, right? There's no snow. They've been doing it for 22 years, so
Right.
the grass really maintains, right?
Yeah, I think we've all heard the happy cows come from California thing.
Right, yeah, but I mean that's changing in California even. Like the Central Valley, cows have been weeded out by almond trees.
Oh,
And something that I came across
yeah.
this past week about the almond trees is like the price of almonds has dropped to a point where all these people paid like Blake was saying like $30,000-$40,000 an acre in some cases for land to produce almonds, right? But now that the price has dropped so much, there's like 12 or 15 farms in the last month that have gone out of business just because like they can't, if they're getting $1.29 an almond, they can't stay in business, right? So that it's
Yeah, it
interesting
takes a
when you
lot of
drive.
water for almonds.
Exactly. And it's mostly drip, so it's not really going back into the aquifers. It's actually it's like drip cycle that's evaporating, right, from the heat. It's not it doesn't penetrate down
Mhm.
back into the aquifer. So that's one of the huge problems, even more so than all the water they use. But the almond orchards have weeded out all these cattle farmers in the Central Valley. And we were talking about context, and I asked him, I said, have you ever thought about taking the knowledge that you have and consulting in an area and changing it similar to like what what's his name, Land to Market, Alan Savory, sorry, just having a little bit of a brain fart. Alan Savory was able to do in Zimbabwe. Like that's how I initially got into the concept of regenerative farming, was Alan Savory and what he did in Zimbabwe, turning arid land back into grasslands in a very short period of time, grazing, I believe, cows, but possibly also elephants on that land. Um, and so it's doable in these very arid climates, and it's the most critical areas in the country to do it. So it seems to me like that knowledge needs to spread out and get done in those areas, especially in order for like the General Mills and these huge corporate conglomerates to attach their names to it and finance it and get involved in it. So I was always very curious about that, and apparently there are people doing it. So that's that's a relief to see that that's happening, and hopefully it's successful, because it's one thing to do it in a great area that has green grass year round. It's another thing to go to like Fresno, California, right in the central part of the state, where they've used tons of chemicals and turn that land around in a short period of time. Like, and when I say short period of time, I'm talking like a decade, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, what is it? What is it, like 7 years you have to farm something before you can certify things organic on the land? Something like that.
I think
But
it's
I think it's
three.
pretty cool to see them doing it with the cows and stuff. That's left. I mean, but it's pretty cool to see them doing with the cows and stuff like that. And I think it's pretty good thing to point out is kind of like, as the cows are dropping the manure, is their things get trampled down. They pack the soil. So when you have those arid climates like in western Kansas and stuff, it's a dust bowl, man. Like there's days where they literally shut down I-70 because it's just there's too much dust. People can't
Mm-hmm.
see. But you have the cows, and then they pack things, and they go in the cycles with the holistic grazing, and then like you said, the turnaround is really quickly. I mean, for what you're going from to what you have at the end of 5 years or 10 years, it's you would never know that it was an arid wasteland, like with what they did in Zimbabwe.
And another major aspect of that turnaround is the water holding capacity. So for each percentage point you improve the organic matter, which they say when you do proper plant holistic management, you can improve the organic matter content of the soil with cows about a half percentage point a year, which is like the highest level. Like most animals, like pigs, chickens, and even growing corn or alfalfa and tilling it back in, or just chopping and dropping, you can improve it about 0.25% per season. So it really doubles the ability to improve that organic matter content. When you improve the organic matter content, like a percentage point, you allow like it to hold like something like 20,000 gallons more water per acre, which is an incredible statistic. I found that really fascinating.
Yeah, that's a lot of water. I was going to say something we did that actually really increased our water holding capacity also was biochar, where we got some
Hmm.
really crazy increases. But you can only go so far with the biochar. After like, if you're talking about virgin soil that's never been messed with, you might do an application every year for 3 years, and then you pretty much maxed out where you want to be with your biochar, pretty much. But you'll see some pretty drastic increases throughout those 3 years in your water holding capacity. And then the nice thing with the manure is you get to go yearly, or seasonally.
Yeah, I haven't heard that about the biochar, but it makes sense because it really improves the fungal biology, right?
Yeah, I forget. I'll have to look up the percentage rate, so I'm not talking out my butt, but it was pretty high. But we only went to like 8%. If you do the math out when you're amending soil, we only did like 8% biochar, and that's pretty like, I think 10% is walking a fine line of where most people max out.
It's also
So we
fascinating,
did like,
like how much biochar can you really create? I mean, if you don't have a commercial infrastructure, so it's like it's hard to have enough biochar to spread on 500 acres too.
yeah, we got lucky. We were in partnership, sort of. We bought everything, but they didn't have a lot of clientele from these guys that were down in southeast Missouri doing huge biochar production, and they also had huge worm casting production. They were growing well over 1,000 acres of organic corn that they were feeding to the worms to produce castings, and we would get 2-ton bags, the tote bags of castings for like $600, bro. And then they would also give us the same size bags of biochar that they were using from the corn husks and stuff like that, to make biochar. We would get biochar from them for the same size bags. We were paying like $250. So, that's a
Wow.
no brainer. So
Yeah.
they would bring it all up and drop it off, and we would just do our thing with it. And we were also batching soil that we would sell to, uh, the locals.
That's a lot of corn to donate or to segregate for worms. That's really fascinating.
Yeah, it was a pretty massive facility. I never got to go there, but I watched videos and stuff of the facility and like video tours, and it was pretty crazy. The indoor, it's all the worm beds are indoors, like in like kind of a warehouse facility setup. But I don't. He said they pretty much only close the doors when it's like severe weather.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, it's really interesting to me
Yeah,
to watch the progression of this regenerative movement and see where it goes. I mean, the company I work for is constantly winning accolades, and people tell us how much they love them. And we had a visit from Jennifer Garner because of her relationship with Once Upon a Farm and our company to our farm this week, which is super cool. Apparently she grew up with a farming family and is really into the idea of doing it right. And it's cool to see people with huge influences starting to understand the importance of it, because I've just really lost faith on a lot of levels that our politicians are going to get it. I just feel like the think tanks are out there and they are getting the information, but there's just so much lobbying coming from the other side that it's really difficult to imagine us turning it around in time. I mean, I really believe that we're in fighting the good fight, and I know you guys are in terms of your homesteading practices, and I would never try to dissuade someone from doing that, but the reality is it has to start happening on a commercial level, and it has to start really evolving quickly. And we've watched the organic food movement grow to, I think, close to like 10% of the overall food movement. But I know you and I have been really interested in this for a while, and I got really into this podcast with Callie Means. First, I saw him on Tom Bilyeu, who's like a kind of a Bitcoin guy talking about food. Tom Bilyeu is also really into health. And then I didn't really pay attention to his name, but then I caught him on Tucker Carlson, and I was like, oh, that's really interesting that Tucker Carlson's having somebody on that's talking in depthly about the food industry. And then I caught him on Dr. Mark Hyman, who is a functional medicine doctor, holistically based, and is really big on, how diet can reverse aging is kind of one of his big themes. And just understanding like the amount of lobbying that's going into this, not only from an agriculture perspective, but also a food perspective, is, I want to say, like disheartening in a lot of ways, because for every one piece of study or legislation or statistical analysis that we come up with in regenerative farming, and we somebody in the industry can present to a political figure, there's 50 or more that are coming from these think tanks that are lobbied at by the Cargills and the Monsantos and the Coca-Colas of the world, and some of their, underlying think tanks like the Heritage Foundation. And, I know that it's controversial to bring them up, but I think, from working in the public for the last like 3-4 years, um, everybody knows it. Everybody knows it. Like, it's not, you got to be living under a rock to not have heard about some of the problems with Monsanto, for example, who now go by Bayer, I guess. But so we know it. What can we do about it? And that's, I think, the crux of it. Like, how do we influence things on a larger level? And that's why I believe in the company I work for, is because we're showing how to do dairy on this level at scale. And Will Harris is showing how to raise grass-fed ground beef at scale. Blake was saying that he's got like 180 employees now, which is a huge number for a regenerative farm. But and he's created a community of people that are doing it too, that aren't necessarily just with his farm. Like, they've seen that they are better off doing it that way, or like the farm that you guys are buying your beef and pig from, they've seen, for whatever reason, whoever they've learned it from, this is a better way to raise their animals, and it causes them to have to bring in less input from outside. But how do we convince the masses, that this is the solution for our future when it comes to agriculture and the food industry? I'm curious your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough one. I think one of the key things is just to start small and start local. Um, like you were pointing out, there's just an overwhelming amount of bureaucracy and politicking involved when it comes to trying to get any kind of legislation or any kind of thing done on a political level that, um, like you said, it's just so disheartening to people who just want to do something and feel like they're actually contributing. Meanwhile, they see that it just comes down to money and politicking and who knows who and all those things. So I think the biggest thing to do is just to get out there and do things. Just get out there and start farming for yourself. Instead of worrying about trying to feed your whole neighborhood, just focus on feeding your family, because really quickly there's going to be an abundance where you're just going to be giving it away. And then
Mm-hmm.
before you know it, if you keep going, you can increase that abundance and start selling stuff or giving it out to more people, and people come around and want to see what's going on. You could, all sorts of people start doing things like seed starts and become a little small nursery in the spring. It's a crazy amount of money you can make selling plants. I mean, we turned
Yeah.
over almost $200,000 in 3 weekends before Mother's Day for a nursery selling seed starts and flowers and soil and things like that. It's crazy.
Wow. That's a huge
But
number.
yeah, and doing what you can do, and like just focusing on what you can do and not being stressed out by what's going on with everything out in the world, and just focusing on what you can contribute at home and do for yourself. And then as things get bigger and better, it'll all get better, and just everything stretches out, and people catch on.
Yeah, and it's the same as politics in terms of like, if you want to make a difference, it's not calling your senator, it's running for local office, right? It's going to the local meeting. Like, we had
Well,
crazy sideshows going on in front of our house, and they went up running into my truck in my driveway, and we met with the police, and there's nothing they can do about it. And I'm not a call the cop kind of guy. I just was like, my car got damaged, I should, release a police report. I saw the kids that did it. And at the end of the day, like, there's nothing they can do. You have to go and you have to meet with the county supervisor. You have to explain to them what's going on. You have to explain to them that there's a school bus stop right on the corner of my road, and there's kids standing there, and these people are doing this at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and before long a little kid's going to get run over. So what are we doing about it? Let's put in some speed bumps, right? And it's the same way when it comes to our food. It's like we need to start asking basic questions, in my opinion. Like, why is it cheaper in a middle school for a child to buy a plastic bottle of Coca-Cola than it is a plastic bottle of water? Why is that?
Yeah, that's insane. Yeah, and I also know where I was going to go with it too. Is I was going to mention, is people just need to do things. And I don't mean that by like, like I was saying, they need to farm and do things on a small level, but it's just do it. It's quit asking.
Mm-hmm.
Is when you see the amount of bureaucracy and politicking going on and money involved in trying to push these things and how defeating it is it's just do it.
Mm-hmm.
Last time I checked, this country was founded by people who actually just wanted to do things and just did it. They tar and feathered people for taxing them too much.
Mm-hmm.
Our founding fathers weren't asking people if they could have 4 chickens in their backyard. Seeing what kind of dog they could have, and registering their garden because the feds are starting to think that our carbon footprint for at-home farmers is too big and needs to be on a register.
Oh God, somebody came out with that recently. The carbon imprint of a backyard garden is terrible. Yeah, it's the bureaucracy is a large hurdle for sure. I mean, I know like at a certain point I was wondering whether I could have a compost pile in my backyard, and I was like, fuck it, I'm putting a compost pile in my backyard. Find me if you want to. And I've already been fined for letting my grass grow too high last year because we had a bunch of weeds growing, and we were like, all right, well, if we let the grass grow, maybe the grass will start to dominate. So what happened? We let it grow high. They said it was kind of a fire hazard. We got fined, and now we have perfectly green grass. Like you look around, our grass is better than all the neighbors that have been using glyphosates for a weed killer. It's really fascinating. And I just I was listening to this guy Callie Means on Tucker that I was talking about, and he had worked for the Heritage Foundation, and he's worked for Coca-Cola, and so he's now on this path with his sister, who I believe her name is Casey, and is a doctor who graduated from with her degree from Stanford, and they're talking about how little that doctors study, and I've known this, but the reality is like nothing they're studying nowadays has anything to do with nutrition, right? And like some of the statistics that he was breaking out, like he's really worth a listen because his ability to recite statistical information is like no other, right? And I get really into that because I think statistics oftentimes like break it down into like a one sentence, like, oh my God, if this is the case, what's the bigger picture for people? But like some of the statistics he was breaking out about, teenagers, for example. I know like you guys homeschool your children, which I'm, I think is super admirable. And I understand the difficulty of it. I was, I've backed down from the idea of having children before, much less homeschooling my children. So I have a great deal of respect for that commitment. Kids these days, like, what is it? I think 50% of adolescents are diabetic these days or something, and like 40% of graduating seniors are on SSRIs or antidepressant medication, and that's all because of the quality of food we're giving them. So at the end of the day, like, how do we stop giving money to these corporate conglomerates? And it goes back to like avoiding, like, whenever something's convenient, it's probably fucking bad for you, right? Like life's not convenient. It's not fair.
Yeah.
It's difficult. It's challenging, right? But all these chefs, like I worked in a 2-star Michelin restaurant, right? And all these chefs are going back to doing things by hand. They're not looking for the latest, greatest piece of equipment to make things with. A lot of them are rolling pasta by hand, or making broth, stirring it by hand for a long period of time, or whatever other old milling flour by hand, right? And so we're finding that quality oftentimes comes from greater effort. Newsflash, like, we're realizing that in so many different contexts these days. Like, when are we going to start applying it and stop going like, oh, there's a reason why they call this a smartphone. It's making all of you dumb, literally.
I had an issue at the post the other day. Couldn't get anything out because the internet was down. It's like, are you serious? I remember going to the post office as a kid and seeing how everything operated. And when I went to the office, internet didn't exist. There was no internet. We didn't even have cell phones. Like, people just get so reliant on this stuff. And it's like you said, as soon as you focus on convenience, quality is usually one of the first things to go out the door. And, you know, these things, like you said, they take time and effort, but the reward is so good. And it's really not that hard. I mean, we cook everything from scratch. It's the only way we're able to afford to eat the way we do. But we get to eat pretty good
Mhm.
because we make it all from scratch and we don't buy things. And, like you said, these 2-star Michelin chefs are starting to do things by hand and do things, but there's also little things that come with it for your health and the benefit of what you're eating. Because when you think about like flour, most people don't realize that once you grind flour, that stuff starts to go rancid, whether you can tell or not. A lot of flour you're buying is not really what you want, but wheat berries store a lot longer. And as soon as
Mm.
you can grind those up really easily and have the same flour ready to rock, but you don't have rancid flour just sitting away in your pantry with mites and stuff in it and all that good stuff. And it applies to nuts. Nuts go rancid as well. And you know, so yeah, like you said, staying small level and using your hands and things like that, um, it just produces a better quality. And then next thing you know, if you want to go larger, you get more hands and you start to employ people. Like you said, that one guy's employed 180 people. That's a lot of money he's putting back into the community, man. I mean, whether people like him or
Mhm.
not, that's a lot of money he's pumping back in the community. And those people are probably getting a lot of their meat and stuff from him. So they're not even spending that money. So that gives them even more money that they can probably spend in their local community. And, you know, a lot of them are probably getting cash paychecks that they cash at the grocery store or something. So they're getting cash on hand and then spending it. So it's pretty cool how big it can get. Like the company that you work for, you guys are doing some pretty cool things, and it seems like there's really no limit to it when you just keep your head down and just work and don't worry about what people are talking about and saying you shouldn't be doing.
I
Work.
think I should share the name of Will Harris's book. I can't believe I didn't write it down before this, but I was just looking it up. It's called A Bold Return to Giving a Damn, and I think that really
It's a nice title.
encapsulates,
I'll have to
right?
get that.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think it really encapsulates where we're at as a society and as a culture. And I'm gonna get it too. I want to read it just because the title's so great and it's so just reflective of where we're at. It's like we have to start asking ourselves, like, do we care about profiting, or do we care about, not just the world we're leaving our children? Like, I'm scared of the world in 15, 20 years. I don't know if I want to get old. I say it all the time. I'm like, man, I hate to be like super pessimistic, but I'm concerned about some of the realistic statistics that we face when it comes to our food and our agriculture. And I'm seeing how crazy people are already becoming because of the lack of nutrient density and the mineralization and all of these factors that come into play from unhealthy soil. And it's we eat a certain way. I think you and I eat very similarly, to where we don't feel the repercussions of it as much as people were around. But like, for me in the public, like every weekend, I see people that I'm just like, I have to exercise an extreme level of patience to at certain times with certain customers, just because I have to remind myself consistently, like, oh, they're probably just devoid of nutrients. It's probably a result of the microbiome of their gut and how that relates to their overall brain chemistry.
Yeah. I mean, that's a pretty compassionate mindset, bro. Not a lot of people can step back and look at people like that. I know we've talked about it pretty good. Um, and yeah, it's wild. Like the way we eat, it's so clean that we can tell. Sometimes we'll get a wild hair up our butts, and we'll be like, "Hey, let's try such and such thing," and you can instantly tell if you're like, "Oh shoot, this has got stuff in it that's just not good. I shouldn't have done that." And or sometimes it's fine, you know, because there's good companies out there where you can kind of tell by their box, like, oh, they might not be paying for the organic labels, but you know, I read their ingredient list and it's all pretty awesome. Um, you know, no food coloring, there's no soy, there's no anything bad. Like a lot of times we find stuff like that looking at popsicles for the kids. One thing we were doing is we got everybody in here on beef liver, like freeze dried beef liver for vitamins now, and that's pretty awesome. Everybody's noticing the difference and feeling really good, um, and it's pretty nice. We changed off of, like, you know, the more traditional vitamins, had the kids on some all organic hard vitamins, but just got them on like one beef liver pill a day, and it's noticeable in their behavior. Like you said, once you start getting all your minerals and stuff balanced out, and then hormones can start leveling out, and people have a little bit more rational minds. And you know, like with kids, that's a pretty big thing. One way we got to kind of work on that patience pretty good was with the urban farm that I worked at in Kansas City. We worked with the Easter Seal program, which is a bunch of autistic kids. You
Mm-hmm.
know, they're probably anywhere from the age of like 13 to 25, 26. You know, some of them would be considered young adults, but they're children because they're, for the most part, most of the kids we dealt with were pretty autistic. Um, but it's pretty cool because once you start seeing these kids getting their hands in the soil and planting seeds and messing with the plants, and we had kids that were doing this, and within like 2 months we had kids that were nonverbal for years that were starting to talk. I mean, mind you, they're not saying like full sentences, but they're talking, you know, and they're making
Yeah.
sounds. And there's kids that are becoming, you know, they'll let you touch them, which if you ever deal with autistic children and people, is touch and sensory is something, is a no-no. Um, but we had some really cool turnarounds where, you know, these people, not only are they dealing with the soil and stuff, but then obviously they're going to start eating the food, right? And they're gonna, and that food's gonna put nutrients back into them. We had some of these people went on and became quite functional and got pretty awesome jobs working in nurseries within like local amusement parks and stuff,
Mm-hmm.
where they got to go to the state level, like the state house, and give a speech on what the Easter Seal program and working with us in the soil did for them. So it's really neat to see what we can do for people, because these are people that were dealing with, you know, clear diagnosed issues like autism. Whereas if we were just talking about people that just have hormone issues and stuff and cognitive issues because they're just malnourished, and we start getting them to do these things, I mean, it could be crazy how quickly people become functional and communicable, if that's even a word.
Well, it's super cool to hear that. You know, I think one of the, I think most eye-opening things that I learned in the Kiss the Ground class was this caricature YouTube video by Dr. Zach Bush. Caricature, I mean, they're like drawing a cartoon while they're telling the story. And I was kind of dating a woman at the time who had to leave the Bay Area and move back to New York to take care of her mother who had dementia. And so, you know, being a, you know, caring about her and wanting to learn about the situation, I started doing some research. I knew a little bit about Alzheimer's. My half sister was one of the heads of the Alzheimer's Institute nationally, and her mother, my father's first wife, passed away from Alzheimer's. So she was really passionate about it, and she's really intelligent. And she would not really didn't understand the relationship between food and health and Alzheimer's, just thought it was like a genetic thing. And I pushed back on that a little bit at the time before I really knew. And then recently, in like the last, you know, 5 or 10 years, a lot of information has come out about it. And so when I was watching this caricature video, Dr. Zach Bush talks about, like, in 1997, there's about, I believe, 3 million tons of pesticide used per acre in the United States, right? And the rate of autism was like on a certain level, right? And then in the next 25 years, in 2022, they did the same study, and the rate had gone up not only for autism, but Alzheimer's, dementia, several other diseases that he mentions that are direct relationship between the microbiome of your gut and your overall brain chemistry, had all gone up about 300%. And as well, in the same period of time, the usage of glyphosates and major pesticides on that level in agriculture had gone up 300%. So there's like a direct line between the two, like this, right? And when you look at some of the studies that people have cited just about autism, right? And now it's like, you know, and some people like RFK Jr. and other people have tried to relate it to vaccinations. I'm not going to get into that topic at the moment for sure, because I don't know enough about it, and I don't feel like the science is necessarily there yet. But that being said, like there
is glyphosate in vaccines.
Okay, yeah, for sure. But I don't want to, you know, freak out the masses by going there quite yet. But the rates are like they're talking like 1 in 4, 1 in 5 boys being born autistic nowadays, right? So it's not just the vaccinations, it's they're being born with it. So there's something that the parents are ingesting that's degrading their genetics to a point where it's happening, right? Also, and but when in the Callie Means interview, he's talking about like not only autism, but some of these other diseases, not just like antidepressant, but some of these other diseases that are increasing. It's like this should be a national emergency when you look at some of these statistics, because there's no way we can fund having a society that's this sick this early on. Like the amount of kids that are becoming diabetic by the time they're 6 years old is astronomical. It's like it's literally criminal at the end of the day. When you look at the statistics and you look at, you know, what's going on, whether or not the politicians are naive or they're just bought and paid for that are making these decisions, or, you know, Citizens United is allowing the food companies just to dictate how things are going down politically. It's irregardless, it's going down like this. And we're at a place where if we don't do something about it now, we don't need to worry about Russia. We don't need to worry about China. We don't need to worry about any other countries. We're fucked by ourselves. We've done it to ourselves. And you know what baffles me.
Well,
go ahead.
I was gonna say it could be a very well planned out experiment. I mean, if you dial in the autism just right, you have a good amount of people who can follow orders really well and do simple tasks really well and get their universal income while they live in their smart cities and don't have to worry about their food and anything like that. And you know, and if they push the autism to a certain extent, I mean, that makes a lot of people that are really easily trafficked. I mean, no one else is going to be taking care of these people.
Yeah. I mean, all of that are factors for sure, and you know, it goes back to like my coworker who's great that I do markets with made the point about the Kellogg's family and when they started with cereal and what their intention was, and their intention literally at the outset, like I'm talking like I believe like late 40s, early 50s, was to get people to eat carbohydrates first thing in the morning to spike their glucose to lower their testosterone so they were more easily controlled. And when you talk about pillars of the, you know, food industry,
like fight or flight.
Yeah, when you talk about people, you know, that are pillars of the food industry that have, you know, created breakfast, like we grew up thinking like breakfast was cornflakes and orange juice. And the reality is those are two of the worst things to put in your body first thing in the day. They completely spike your glucose and prevent your ability to uptake testosterone, which is what promotes critical thinking. And these heavy fat foods are actually helping your brain function. And so, you know, we've literally flipped the script on ourselves. And I think we're at the point now in society where we need to start asking ourselves why.
Yeah, I think a lot of it just comes down to the convenience. You know, that was you know, when the Kellogg's came out, and a lot of that was when women started going into the workforce. So they had to have an easy breakfast for the kids. And so cereals became a big thing. I mean, oatmeals and things like that weren't the best either, but cereal got a lot more large spread once the whole convenience factor sets in. And then once you fast forward to the 90s, where you start having a lot more income issues, you have kids getting free school lunches, and eventually they started free breakfast programs where, my family took advantage, I don't want to say take advantage of it, but we qualified for it and we got those breakfasts, and they were cereal, bro. Cereal. And there was some days where your breakfast was a milk and a juice and a sticky bun, the big old honey
Yeah.
buns. And it's just always carbohydrates and stuff like that put your body in a fight or flight. And no wonder these kids can't sit still and pay attention. Not only with the beef liver, but what my kids eat for breakfast half the time, or I wouldn't see half the time, but probably 80 to 90% of the time is they just have a little bit of steak and some eggs and some potatoes, and that's their breakfast.
God, I love that
And
breakfast.
sometimes they'll have a muffin later on, but it's not the first thing they eat. It's later on, after their glucose levels have already been locked in for the day by their steak and their eggs.
Mm-hmm.
And they're just
Yeah, I have a lot of customers that are getting up and doing our kefir first thing in the morning, and we've been teaching them to do it on an empty stomach and wait like 15 minutes to a half hour. Just do a 2 to 4 ounce shot, wait 15 minutes to a half hour, and then do your tea, your coffee, your breakfast. And I'm not out there, selling milk and dairy products to people trying to tell them how to eat, but there are a lot of people that, they want the benefits of the probiotics because they understand the relationship between the microbiome of our gut and our brain chemistry. And I have customers who are like 75, 80 years old, and they're coming and they're getting a couple bottles of kefir a week, and they're doing this program. And I've told the people in my company where I've really seen the difference with them in particular is in their eyes when they come back and they've been doing it for 2 weeks, 3 weeks in a row, sometimes a couple months. You see these people and they're the iridology of your eyes shows everything about a person's makeup, all their organs. And I don't know how to see that, obviously, but I just see the brightness of their eyes and the focus, knowing these people like I have for a couple years in many cases or longer. And it's super cool to see it in people that are like 60, 70, 80 years old, and see them really gain the benefits. And it makes me think like the path with which I eat, when I take in protein, when I take in carbs, the order with which I eat my food, even, doing greens first, then protein, then carbs last on your plate, not mixing all of them. All of these sort of things are factors in our overall nutritional health. And the more our food gets polluted, the more we are obligated to think about these things and treat our bodies like the temples they are in our process of the order with which we feed ourselves, not only the quality of ingredients. I mean, you have like what I forget what it was I was listening to this week, but they were talking about the people coming over the border, right? And they're getting sent to these sanctuary cities, and they're winding up in New York City. And in particular, New York City is giving them debit cards now. I know we're giving them like $2,200 a person or something, and we've retitled them from illegal immigrants to newcomers, according to the Nancy Pelosi's and Joe Biden's of the world, which I find really fascinating. But even outside of that, like they're coming and we're giving them food, right? And we're not giving as much to homeless people. We're giving it to people that are entering the country illegally in many cases. But the food that we're giving them is so bad that they're refusing it. They're literally refusing the food that we're giving them. And this is the same food in many cases that we're giving children in public schools, right? But because they're refusing it so um, prolifically, for lack of a better term, and so adamantly is what I wanted to say. We've now given them debit cards to where they can go out and buy higher quality food, because God forbid people enter the country illegally and aren't given the quality of food that they were getting, oftentimes coming from second and third world countries. That's where we've gotten to in this country. And that is fucking scary. Pardon my French.
Yeah, it is scary. I mean, and what's wild is some of the things that they were getting in other countries is probably better. Like, all the sodas like Coca-Cola and Mountain Dew. If you buy them here, you can look at them. They have all the caramel color and yellow whatever and red this food colorings in them and horrible things. But if you go to Mexico or Canada and you buy those things and you look at them, there's no food coloring. There's none of those terrible chemicals in it.
There's probably not
It's
even
a
high
cleaner
fructose corn
product.
syrup, right?
And it's bizarre that we do all these things for. No, there's not. And it's bizarre that we do it for these people that are coming here illegally when, and it's all this quote unquote woke agenda for it that they're, these newcomers, but meanwhile no other countries are doing this. uh when I went through my little fiasco, we went up to Canada and talked to social workers and stuff to see what it would take to assimilate into Canada. And they basically said, well, you're American and you're white, so it's not going to happen. They said if you were black from Africa and stuff, that they could have made it happen instantly because of the way they were able to push all the politics with whatever they were doing, trying to bring in politically. That's what they were doing. And they said if you were on the West Coast, of course, they would take a lot of Asian refugees is what they claim.
Mm-hmm.
You got to claim the refugee status. So, but they said being a white person coming from America, you're screwed. But yeah, we're just taking tons and tons of mid-20s military age men with no children and no women and giving them a pretty nice salary, $2,200 a month on a rechargeable debit card. And like you said, plus they're giving them debit cards with per diem for food now. And I've seen some places where they were getting pretty good food, like in the hotels that they're staying at.
Mm-hmm.
They're getting like $300 steak dinners and shit brought to their hotel rooms. So it's just absurd. It's absurd. And you and I can't eat like that. No one,
No, I
no
mean
one would think to eat like that.
it's out of
That's a lot of
control.
money.
Yeah, it's out of control, and it's just backwards. And it's like if we're not prioritizing our own children, and not only through the education platforms that have been totally corrupted, but with the nutrition we're giving them, and we're at a point where like half the kids in schools are diabetic, and I mean, I remember when I was a kid, like you couldn't always just go to the Coca-Cola machine and grab a Pepsi or a Coke. Like it wasn't cool. Your teachers wouldn't let you. You could do it maybe at lunch, but you couldn't do it whenever you wanted.
We didn't have
Now,
access.
yeah, nowadays you can walk into class with a Coca-Cola and nobody thinks differently. And it's like Dr. Mark Hyman was talking about in that interview with Callie Means. He was like, we went to Kenya and we visited the Maasai tribe, who's like, in Kenya, like renowned, uh, having old school native practices on all levels, from their hunting to the way they eat and whatnot. And apparently at this tribe, there was a Coca-Cola truck that pulled up every day, and all the tribal members would run to the Coca-Cola truck and they would slug down like one, two, multiple Coca-Colas, and they'd leave a pile of bottles, right? Because they don't have a trash program like we do. So they leave a pile of bottles. And so Mark Hyman went and asked the tribal elder, he's like, hey, how often does this Coca-Cola truck come? And the guy was like, oh, it comes every day. And he explained to him the relationship between diabetes and Coca-Cola. And the tribal leader looked at Mark Hyman and was like, oh my God, like a light bulb went off. And he's like, that's literally the number one cause of death now in our tribe. So it's like these people are the same way we used to call people that are selling weapons merchants of death. It's like, when are we going to start people that are distributing Coca-Cola and high fructose corn syrup and food that's chock full of glyphosates? When are we going to start relating them the same way? Because it's not a quick death. It's a long death. And it's a death that, the reason that they're getting those kids become their most profitable markers over time, because by the time they're 16 to 25 years old, they're on drugs from then on for the rest of their lives. And I don't think we have time today to talk about like Ozempic or some of that reality. But when we're like telling people like, oh, you don't have to pay attention to what you eat, just get this shot every month, you'll be good. Like, what are we doing as a society?
Yeah.
Who is running the show at this point?
Well, it's like Callie Means was saying, they're starting to classify dementia as a type 3 diabetes.
Hmm.
And like you said, you've lost relatives to dementia. I've lost a grandma to dementia who was in a nursing home. And one thing I noticed that was kind of disgusting about the nursing home is they have open happy hour every day, which is where every person that lives there can get 2 free drinks at the bar. And if they have a guest there, they can get a free drink. And alcohol just breaks down into sugar just as rapidly. And to compound it, a lot of people mix their alcohol with soda. So you're getting a double whammy of all that
Hmm.
intense sugar that's turning into dementia, where all these elderly people are just rotting their brains out. Not to mention, there's a lot of work coming out now where they're showing people's brains from alcoholics, and they're showing the deterioration of their brain is pretty much exactly the same as people with diabetes that leads into what Callie Means was saying is type 3 diabetes dementia,
Yeah.
where their brain just eats itself up.
And I mean, most bourbon, I think a lot of people don't realize this, like 99% of bourbon is made from GMO corn. And I learned that when I had my ice cream shop. I was like, I learned about it early on. I was like, oh shit, okay, well, what bourbon can we use that wasn't? And the company we wound up going with was like, yeah, we can make that claim for about another year, but there's just not enough non-GMO corn that's affordable for us to be able to do that and sell our product nationwide in the next like 2-3 years.
Yeah.
So
I
that,
mean,
that
there's people that are probably doing things, but they're definitely not getting publicized and stuff. It's kind of like that guy, the people doing the biochar and the worm castings. Like that's a lot of corn, and it's all organic. Um, I mean, obviously things are going to be affected by other crops and stuff like that, but you know, that's probably part of the reason why they demonize all the moonshine and stuff like that. Is you can get some of those guys that are in the haulers making their own moonshine and white lighting and stuff. They're not buying corn. They can't afford to buy corn to make their stuff. They're growing their own corn.
yeah.
You know. So, and they're not getting Monsanto corn. They're getting the corn that their grandpappy gave them, and they're keeping their own corn every year. So, I mean, there's the good people that are doing the good stuff. Are whether we want to say drinking alcohol like that is great or not is at least on that level they're getting probably a little better product that's not going to be so nasty, but it's still going to lead towards diabetes and brain destruction
Well, again,
because it's got
again,
more
it's a
sugars,
it's a
got more added
craft,
sugars.
it's a craft product that we're talking about. You know what I mean? It's going back to doing it on a small scale.
Right.
And I think that's the problem with America. Even and we saw it with organic standards. When organic standards got brought to the masses, the quality dropped. When regenerative practices get labeled and certified, and you have organizations like ROC, Regenerative Organic Certification, and the standards get brought down so people can play. And there's companies who have 78 farms, and one of them is actually regenerative, so they're able to sit behind the regenerative label, you know, and or you have like Vital Chickens, who's like somehow floating with restorative as far as their eggs go, and I don't know what restorative means, like and I wasn't big on the title regenerative when
Right.
I first learned about it from like you know Josh and Kelly from Dragonfly. I was like, this seems like a title. I feel like it's going to get greenwashed in cannabis. Like I was already trying to come up with rejuvenative or other names that kind of encompass the same
Mm-hmm.
ideology, but standards are standards, and they need to be held on a certain level. And I don't think that a farm that's like 77 of 78 are you know or not regenerative or conventional or not all organic or whatever. I don't think that they should be able to like greenwash to that level. And that's just another area in food where money talks, and everybody else falls by the wayside. So I'm glad that we get to have these talks, because at least on a small grassroots level we can expose some of these things and talk about it, and make people hopefully people will listen to this and they'll start asking the right questions. That's all I want to ask of people, is like, hey, you know ask us the right questions, ask your farmer the right question, ask people, ask your your buyer at your grocery store the right questions, because that's how we change things. It's not calling your senator and being like, hey, I don't like that you voted for this. That's not doing anything. Let's realize that sooner than later.
Yeah, and put your kids in FFA. And if you don't have a local FFA, start one. Because I mean, you can learn so much in that, it's not even funny. I mean, they teach kids how to do entomology, where you can identify bugs, to where you can do soil study, where you can learn to ID the best kind of soil compositions and all those good things, and it just goes on and on. And these kids can then go on and actually quantifiably, uh, you know, look at regenerative farms and see that they're actually doing these practices where we can actually count bugs and increases in certain kinds of bugs and animals, and actually prove that, you know, yeah, they might be generating some funds, but are they actually regenerating the ecosystem around them? Are they putting money into the people around them? Is the whole entire surrounding them, is that regenerating, or is it just their company regenerating? And so that's kind of cool that if people can actually, you know, learn some of these skills, then there is really ways to quantifiably prove that things are getting better, even on just a visual and taking records level, you know. And it's a
Or
good thing for kids.
absolutely, that's a great idea. And you know, whether or not things are getting better, taking strides towards making them better. You know, it's like goes back to something I was talking with Blake about. We were talking about the 6 pillars of regenerative farming, and it's like, is it important to follow all those 6 pillars, or is it more important to understand your context and figure out which of them work best for you and take one step at a time? Like in nutrition, when you switch over to a healthy diet, you can't eliminate cigarettes, alcohol, Coca-Cola, and high fructose corn syrup on the whole from your diet overnight and expect results. Like you have to take baby steps. And I think that if you know, I can encourage anyone to do anything. It's like pick what you think is the most important baby step, or even more importantly, pick what's the most doable baby step and take that stride this week, and then see how you feel and focus on something else next week or next month or whatever. But like, take a step in the right direction. That's all I want to ask of people.
Yeah, exactly. Do work. And like you said, focus on what you can do best, especially. It's kind of like with finances. Like if you have 5 bills and you get all 5 bills, you have to pay the minimum, and you have a pretty nice chunk left over. You're not going to get anywhere if you spread that leftover chunk amongst all 5 bills. But if you put that all towards one bill, eventually you're going to get that one knocked out. Then you'll have all that excess left over, and you just continually knock them out. And the same thing goes with regenerative farming. Like, you know, like you said, focus on the one thing that you can do best, that helps you the best, and that you can really rock out and do that. And then next thing you know, you're going to have time freed up to start focusing on the next thing, or, you know, learning the next thing and getting better at the next thing. And, or other people are going to show up to help you they can do those things better. That way, not everybody feels like they have to do everything. And things, and then look at that, now all of a sudden you got more people involved, so somebody might be getting paid, and here we go, we're again regenerating things on a real actual level instead of just getting paid.
Yeah. All right. Well, on that note, I love that sentiment, and I think we should end it there for sure. It's been a really enjoyable talk for me, and I hope that people were able to gain a little nugget from this, if nothing else.
Yeah, I had a great time. I always look forward to our talks, and like you said, I hope people really were able to take away something that they can implement in their lives, or at least think about, and kind of a little something to chew on, where they can kind of gain some kind of positive benefit in their lives.
Yeah, and when we release these talks, I want to encourage people to like feel free to leave comments, like send us direction. It's not always easy to find things that you know that we want to talk about or we want to study or we want to become aware of. You know, there's so many things going on these days, and you know, I was blessed to get turned on to the Mike Benz interview, and I found that really interesting, and maybe we'll talk about that some more like next in the coming weeks, in the coming episodes. But you know, I'm very thankful for my customers that get to share that with us, and you know, I know you, Mike, you don't have the same platform of talking to 1,000 people a weekend like I do. So please feel free to share opinions or comments or whatever. That's how we grow. That's how we get better. That's how we learn more, and
Yeah,
that's how we gain perspective.
for sure. Yeah, I love the comment stuff. It's always fun.
All right, man. Well, enjoy your week. I appreciate your time.